On the 25th of February 2022, 5 divers enter a hyperbaric work chamber at Paria, Trinidad and Tobago in the Gulf of Paria. All 5 divers are sucked into a pipeline and only 1 survives. Paria Fuel operates oil and gas processing plants in Paria in Trinidad and Tobago. In June 2021, Paria commissions LMCS Limited, a professional diving services company, to undertake the maintenance of a pipeline which has been inactive since they took ownership of the facility in 2018. The pipeline is 30 inches or 76 centimeters in diameter, and it's there to transport oil from the ships who will dock at berth number 6 to Paria's processing facility on land. The pipeline consists of a riser which comes up to meet the ship. It drops some 60 feet to the ocean floor, followed by around 1,200 feet of pipeline to the next riser at berth number 5. It's effectively a U-shaped pipe with either end of the pipe out of the water. The pipe makes its way along a seabed at varying depths. Because the pipeline's inactive, it doesn't have any equipment like a pump attached to it. On the 25th of February 2022, 4 working divers and 1 safety diver board a barge that takes them to the worksite. The worksite is at the top of the riser at berth 6. Over the top of the riser is a habitat. This habitat is a large bucket that's placed upside down over the riser. The habitat is filled with air from a compressor on the barge. As the air is pumped into the habitat, the air pressure forces the water out of the habitat and provides a dry work area that's effectively below sea level. The 4 divers are Faisal Kurban, Rishi Nagasar, Yusuf Henry and Kazim Ali Jr., and a safety diver, Christopher Bodrum. All of these men have families like you and I who are waiting for them to come home. They get into their scuba gear on the barge and enter the water. First in are Faisal, Rishi, Yusuf and Chris. They dive down and under the bottom of the habitat, then enter the habitat from the bottom, swimming up into the air pocket. First, they take off their scuba gear in the habitat, then set about preparing the worksite. Their plan for the day is to weld on a section of pipe to the riser. The first step is to remove a steel plate that covers the pipe. From there, they need to remove 2 flanges or plugs. If you take a look at my videos about the Wildrake or the Byford Dolphin disasters, you'll see that independent investigations into these kinds of accidents often take many years. I'll leave links to those videos in the description. There's a lot of technical information to digest. There are also families of the victims who need to be heard and understood. There are multiple companies who have an interest in protecting themselves from litigation. And of course, the people involved in the decision that led up to an accident want to protect themselves from liability and humiliation. Most of the time, accidents happen because of a number of reasons, and nobody really knows why at first. The reason it takes so long to investigate is because you have to fully investigate, and most of the time everyone is reluctant to hand over all the information needed. More than that, it's not always clear what details are important, and so the people involved don't even know they made a mistake until all the information comes to light. This accident happened early in 2022, and I'm publishing this video only 8 months later. That's not enough time for a full investigation. There's very little concrete information on the accident and even less about the technical details. I decided to publish this video because it's quite clear to me how the science works from a diving perspective, but not all the details are clear. In the end, the specifics may vary, but I believe the fundamentals of this video are sound. I'll do my best to let you know what I think is not clear. The top of the riser has been sealed with a blank or steel plate. That plate is removed first. Then a plug is removed. I found suggestions that it's an inflatable plug, but I can't be certain, although that would make sense. The plug is there to make sure the riser doesn't fill with water and to prevent any gases coming up into the habitat from inside the pipe. One expert has said there was probably a second inflatable plug deeper inside the pipe which remains in the pipe while work has been completed. A first-hand account talks about 2 plugs to remove before work starts. Exactly what these plugs look like, how many there are, and where in the pipe they are is not clear. What seems likely to me is that there's a plug at the top of the riser and then one further down the pipe. At around 14:45, the last diver, Kazim Ali Jr., enters the habitat just as the plug is removed. Safety personnel on the barge see a splash inside the habitat on their monitors, and then they lose the signal coming from the divers' cameras. All 5 divers are sucked into the pipe and are swept along in a torrent of swirling water. It happens so quickly that they're confused and disorientated. They're being battered down the pipe, and to make matters worse, some of their equipment is riding this wave with them. As they slide down the pipe, they're trying to stabilize themselves while being beaten by tanks and their friends' bodies. It's like going down a water slide in the dark and having other people and a bunch of heavy equipment dropped in with you. Eventually, they come to a stop. Fading in and out of consciousness, they slowly find each other. Their bodies are beaten, bruised, and mangled. They start to pull and push each other back up the pipeline. The safety diver, Chris, is closest to where they went in. Progress is slow. The pipe has water in it, so they use their scuba tank at times. They stop to take regular breaks and say a prayer for help to find them. In order to understand what happened, you need to know a little bit about pressure and the relationship between water and air. Air can be compressed, but water can't. When the habitat is filled with air to force the water out, that air doesn't replace the water in a 1-to-1 ratio. For roughly every 3 feet of water that's pushed down and out of the habitat, around 10% more surface air volume is required to replace the same volume of water. So if you have to push 100 gallons of water out of a 3-foot space, you would need 110 gallons of air. The 100-gallon volume of water is replaced with 110 gallons of air that is compressed by roughly 10%. What that means is you end up with a high pressure. Air always wants to move from a high pressure to a low pressure. As the last plug is removed at the top of the pipe inside the habitat, the air expands. It moves from the high pressure in the chamber to the lower pressure in the pipe. It's likely that the plug further down the pipe experiences an increase in pressure and abruptly fails. When that second plug fails, the compressed air in the habitat escapes through the pipe. As the air escapes down the pipe, the habitat rapidly fills with water. The water splashes up over the pipe and completely engulfs the habitat. Now gravity takes over and the water spills down the pipe, taking the divers with it. The water in the habitat settles quickly to sea level, and the nightmare for these 5 divers begins. It's not clear if the sea level is above or below the pipe. I assume it's below sea level because the pipe does not completely flood. There are so many questions I have about the exact setup. I have no doubt the inquiries into this accident will have similar questions. This only explains the mechanics of what probably happened inside the habitat. Chris Bodrum is not calculating this explanation when he and his colleagues decide that he would leave them in the pipe to make a final push on his own to get the help they all need to make it out alive. Chris says a final prayer with them and promises he'll be back with help as soon as he can. Then he works his way back along the pipe. Eventually he gets close enough to the top of the pipe that he can hear the sounds change, and he knows that he's within earshot of the top. He doesn't have enough energy to pull himself up and out of the pipe, and so he calls for help. Nobody's there. His heart sinks because he knows how close he is, and yet it's impossible to climb out without any help. I can't tell from the information available if the pipe is filled with water to a point where he has floated up closer to the surface, or if he's still 60 feet down at the bottom of the pipe. I assume there is some water in the pipe, but it's not filled up. It's very difficult for a fit and healthy man to push his way 60 feet up a pipe. After what Chris has been through and the injuries he sustained, it's impossible. All he can do is shout and hope someone hears him. At 17:45, about 3 hours after the accident, Michael Kerben, who also works for LMCS, The same company Chris is from hears Chris, and together with another colleague, they're able to pull him out. Chris explains the other 4 divers are injured but alive and in desperate need of help. Michael tries to descend down the pipe, but he can only make it a short way. By now, other emergency crew are on the scene. Paria Fuel has their own emergency response unit, and the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard are involved in the rescue. They send a camera down as far as they can. It can only get to the bottom of the pipe. They then bring a pipe inspection camera which can drive up the pipe. The camera reveals that there's an obstruction about 120 feet into the pipe. Diving gear is wedged in the pipeline and the camera can't get past. A decision is made not to enter the pipe until a recovery plan is made that will protect the lives of the rescuers. This is a contentious decision. Crew from LMCS want to enter the pipe but aren't allowed to for their own safety. Chris Bodrum says he'll go back in, injuries and all, and can't understand why the rescue operation has stalled. 2 days go by and no rescue is made. It's not clear what attempts are made. On the 27th of February, the rescue is called off and the plan shifts to body recovery. On the 28th of February, 3 bodies are recovered and the final body is recovered on the 3rd of March. Chris Bodrum is the only survivor. I expect it'll take many years for the families of those who died to get any form of closure.